The Chamber of Voices was full. Danny had never seen it this crowded. Every seat was taken. Extra platforms had been brought in for delegations that normally sent only 1 or 2 representatives, but had today sent 5 or 6. The air was thick with the sounds of dozens of languages being run through translation devices. A constant low hum of voices that bounced off the high walls and mixed together into something that sounded almost like the roar of an ocean. Danny stood near the human seat at the back of the lower level. Leo stood beside him, holding a datapad with notes he had been working on all night. Katie Voss watched from the gallery above, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Nora Finch was not in the chamber at all. She was back at Mirren Station, monitoring communications and watching for anything unusual. She had told Danny before he left that she had a bad feeling about today. Danny had told her that he shared it. High Arbiter Zoraf sat in his elevated throne at the center of the chamber. He was old, even by Valyrian standards. His crystalline skin had a deep blue color that came with age, and he moved with the careful slowness of someone who had learned long ago that rushing was a waste of energy. His face showed nothing. It never did. Danny had spent years trying to read that face, and had never succeeded. The session was called to order. The usual formalities were observed. Then Ambassador Tail of the Dravosi hegemony rose from his seat. Tail was tall for a Dravosi, with smooth gray skin and eyes that were just a little too wide, giving him a look of permanent, pleasant surprise that Danny had never trusted. He spoke with the easy confidence of someone who knew he had the votes before the debate even started. He introduced Resolution 7742, which he called the Sovereignty Adjustment Act. He read its provisions in a calm, reasonable voice, as if he were describing a minor change to a shipping schedule rather than the dismantling of everything humanity had built. The resolution had 4 main points. First, human military vessels would no longer operate independently. All human ships would be placed under Council command authority. Second, human-built infrastructure, including the relay network, would be transferred to Council ownership and operated under Dravosi Valyrian oversight. Third, human trade agreements made outside Council channels would be voided. Fourth, all human intelligence operations would be shut down and their data handed over to Council security services. Leo's hand tightened around his datapad until his knuckles went white. When Tail finished, he sat down with a small, satisfied smile and folded his hands in his lap. Zoraf turned his slow gaze to the human delegation. Ambassador Marsh, you may respond. Danny stood. He did not rush. He walked to the speaking platform at the center of the chamber and looked up at the hundreds of faces looking down at him. Some were curious. Some were bored. Some were already certain of what was going to happen and were just waiting for it to be over. He spoke plainly. He did not use fancy words or dramatic gestures. He simply told the truth. He told them that in the past 20 years, human engineers had built or repaired infrastructure on 47 Council worlds. He told them that human medical teams had responded to 18 major health crises across the galaxy. He told them that Katie Voss and the Human Defense Fleet had defended 3 Council worlds during the Outer Reach skirmishes, while the Council was still debating whether to send help. He told them that the relay network handled over 9 billion communications per day, and that every single relay station had been designed, built, and maintained by human hands. He told them that humanity had never asked for payment for any of it, not once. Then he asked a simple question. What kind of galaxy do you want to live in? One where helping your neighbors is rewarded, or one where it is punished? The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Tail rose again. He was smooth. Danny had to give him that. Tail did not deny anything Danny had said. Instead, he reframed it. He called humanity's contributions admirable but concerning. He said that no single species should have so much control over critical infrastructure. He said that the resolution was not a punishment, but a natural evolution of shared governance. He suggested with a gentle smile that humanity's rapid expansion into every corner of galactic life was itself a form of quiet empire building, whether humans intended it or not. Several delegations nodded. The Valurians remained still, which for them was the same as nodding. The Zorvan representatives looked bored. They had never cared about politics. They cared about power, and this resolution did not threaten theirs. Liaison Omic of the Peleni stood. He was small and thin, even by Peleni standards, and his voice was soft. But when he spoke, Danny could hear the anger underneath the gentle words. Omic reminded the chamber that his people had been dying when humanity came to help. He said that the ships Katie Voss brought had saved over 200,000 lives. He said that the Peleni had been council members for 600 years, and that it had been a species with provisional membership, the lowest rank in the room, that had come to their rescue. He asked the chamber to consider what it meant to punish that kind of kindness. He was thanked politely for his remarks. Then the chamber moved on. The vote was called. Danny watched the tallies appear on the display screen above Zorath's throne. Green for yes, red for no. The green numbers climbed quickly. The Dravosi voted yes. The Valurians voted yes. 17 other delegations voted yes. The Zorvan abstained, which was the same as yes. The red numbers were small. The Peleni voted no. 2 minor species, the Torathi and the Yemni, voted no. That was all. 3 votes against a tide that had already decided where it was going before anyone opened their mouths. The resolution passed. Zorath announced the result in his slow, deep voice. The chamber stirred with movement and conversation. Tail leaned back in his seat with the look of a man who had just won a game he had been playing for years. Danny stood perfectly still. He looked at the tally on the screen. He looked at Zorath. He looked at Tail. He looked at the hundreds of delegates who had just voted to take everything humanity had freely given and claim it as their own. Then he straightened his jacket, picked up his datapad, and said clearly enough for the translators to carry it to every ear in the room, "The human delegation acknowledges the council's decision." He walked out of the chamber. Leo followed. Neither of them looked back. That night, they gathered in a sealed conference room aboard Mirren Station. Katie Voss paced back and forth like a caged animal. Her face was red, and her voice shook when she spoke. She said they had the ships and the people, and the right. Leo sat with his hands folded, staring at the table. He had run the numbers. Fighting would cost more than it would gain, no matter how justified it was. Nora Finch pulled up her intelligence reports. She showed them that the Dravosi had been planning this for at least 3 years. Tail had been building his coalition quietly, making deals behind closed doors, promising favors to delegations that voted the right way. It was not a sudden decision. It was a trap that had been closing around them for a long time. Becky Sloan sat in the corner and said nothing. She was thinking about the relay network. She was thinking about the stations and the systems and the years of work that had gone into building something she had been proud of. And she was thinking about what it would mean to walk away from all of it. Danny let everyone speak. Then he said what he had been thinking since the moment the vote was called. "We are not going to fight this," he said. "We are going to leave." Katie stopped pacing. "Leave?" "Everything," Danny said. "Every station, every patrol route, every embassy, every relay, every agreement. We pull out completely. We go home." The room was silent. Then Leo nodded slowly. "They wanted to control what we built. Let them try to run it without us." Danny looked at each of them. No anger, no threats, no sabotage. We leave cleanly, politely, and completely, and then we let them find out what the galaxy looks like without us in it." He turned to Nora. "Send the recall order. Every outpost, every vessel, every embassy." Nora opened her communicator. Her fingers moved across the controls. A single encrypted message went out to every human installation in the galaxy. It was short. It contained only 2 words. "Come home." The recall order spread through human space like a whisper, passed from ear to ear. There was no announcement. There was no press conference. There was no angry speech broadcast across the galaxy. The order went out, and humans began to move. Greg Holden was the first to feel it. He was sitting in the command chair of the Ironwood, a patrol vessel assigned to the border of Zorvon space. It was a thankless job. The Ironwood ran escort missions for Council trade convoys that passed through dangerous territory. The convoys carried goods for a dozen different species, and in 6 years of service, not one of those species had ever sent a message of thanks to Greg or his crew. They did their job. They kept people safe, and they were invisible. When the recall order came through, Greg read it twice. Then he called his crew together in the small common room at the center of the ship. There were 42 of them. Engineers, pilots, weapons officers, medical staff. They had been living and working in this stretch of space for years, far from home, far from anything that felt like it belonged to them. "We have been recalled," Greg said. "All of us. Every human ship, every station, every outpost. We are going home." A young officer named Pete Garza asked, "What about the convoy we are supposed to escort next week?" Greg shook his head. "Someone else will have to handle it." Pete looked uncertain. "There is no one else out here, sir." Greg met his eyes. "I know." The Ironwood completed its final patrol that evening. Greg filed a standard departure notice with the nearest Zorvon outpost, a short formal message that said the human patrol vessel was ending its assignment and returning to human space. He did not explain why. He set a course for home, and the Ironwood slipped away into the dark between the stars. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out in silence. On the Peleni colony world of Tessara, a human medical team had been running a clinic for 3 years. They treated infections, set broken bones, delivered babies, and trained local doctors. The head of the team, a woman named Amy Bright, received the recall order while she was in the middle of treating a child with a respiratory illness. She finished the treatment, made sure the child was stable, and then gathered her team. They packed their equipment carefully. Amy wrote detailed notes for every ongoing patient, and left them with the Peleni medical staff. She spent her last night on Tessara, training 2 young Peleni nurses on how to operate the diagnostic equipment she was leaving behind. She did not tell them why she was leaving. She just hugged them at the door of the clinic, and walked to the transport without looking back. Becky Sloan had the hardest job of all, and she did it with the calm focus of someone building a bridge, not burning one. The subspace relay network was the most important piece of infrastructure in the galaxy. Every world depended on it. Every government used it. Every military needed it. And every single piece of it had been designed by humans. Becky did not destroy it. Danny had been very clear about that. No sabotage, no revenge. They would leave things functional. But Becky was an engineer, and she knew the difference between functional and optimized. Over the course of 3 months, her teams visited every relay station in the network. They removed the proprietary software cores that made the system fast and efficient. They replaced them with basic, open-source alternatives that any species could maintain. They disconnected the human-designed routing algorithms that allowed the network to handle billions of messages per day without lag. The relays still worked when they were done. Messages still went through. But what had once been instant was now slow. What had once been smooth was now rough. It was like replacing the engine of a racing ship with the engine of a cargo hauler. The ship still moved, but it did not fly. Becky felt something heavy in her chest, as she watched her teams pull out the last software core from Relay Station 14, the first station she had ever built. She had been 29 years old when she designed it. She had spent 3 months living on the construction platform, eating bad food and sleeping in a room the size of a closet. And she had been so proud when the first message traveled through it. Then she sealed the door and walked away. Nora Finch shut down the intelligence network piece by piece. Listening posts that had monitored pirate movements went dark. Data sharing links with Council security services were disconnected. Early warning systems that tracked weapons shipments and fleet movements were taken offline. She was thorough. She made sure that not a single byte of classified human data remained on any non-human server. She wiped backup drives, closed encrypted channels, and pulled monitoring satellites from their orbits. When she was done, there were holes in the galaxy's awareness, blind spots where human eyes had once been watching. No one noticed the holes yet. They would. Katie Voss handled the military pullback. Human defense platforms orbiting 3 Council worlds were powered down and towed away by cargo ships. Joint patrol agreements were allowed to expire without renewal. Katie sent formal notices to every Council military command she had worked with, thanking them for their cooperation and informing them that human forces were withdrawing to their own territory. She did it by the book. Every notice was polite, every withdrawal was orderly. She made sure no Council world was left in immediate danger by the departure, though she knew that long-term danger was a different matter entirely. Leo Pratt closed the embassies. He was good at paperwork, and he made sure every closure was handled with perfect diplomatic courtesy. Each embassy sent a letter to its host government, expressing gratitude for the partnership and hope for future cooperation when circumstances permit. The letters were warm and professional and absolutely final. Leo sealed each one with the human diplomatic stamp and sent them off, one by one, like closing chapters in a book. The Council barely noticed at first. The Dravosi were celebrating. Tyle gave a speech to his delegation about the new era of balanced governance and how the resolution had corrected an unhealthy dependence on a single species. Several other delegations congratulated him. There were receptions and formal dinners. Zorath watched from his throne and said nothing. He was old enough to know what silence looked like when it meant something. But even he did not fully understand what was happening. Not yet. Omik understood. The Peleni liaison contacted Danny 3 days before the human embassy on Kalasa closed. They met in a small room with no windows and 2 cups of tea that neither of them drank. "You are really leaving," Omik said. It was not a question. "We are," Danny replied. "Everything?" "Everything." Omik was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Is there anything the Peleni can do?" Danny reached across the table and took Omik's hand. The Peleni's fingers were thin and cool, and they trembled slightly. "Look after your people, Omik," Danny said. "That is all we ever wanted anyone to do." Omik nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. The last human transport left Kolosa Station on a quiet morning. There was no ceremony. No crowd gathered to watch. The docking bay was empty except for a single maintenance worker who did not even look up as the ship pulled away. The lights in the human quarter of the station went dark. The embassy doors were locked. The nameplate beside the entrance, which read Diplomatic Mission of Humanity, was taken down and packed into a crate. No one was there to see the ship grow smaller against the stars. No one watched as it turned toward human space and accelerated until it was just a point of light, and then nothing at all. The human chair in the Chamber of Voices sat empty. It was just a metal seat with a thin cushion. It looked very small in that enormous room, but somehow the room felt smaller without anyone sitting in it. The first 6 months were easy. That was the worst part. The first 6 months felt like nothing had changed at all. The relay network still worked. Messages still traveled between worlds. Trade convoys still flew their routes. The council still met and debated and passed resolutions. Ambassador Tyeel still smiled his wide smile and talked about the success of the Sovereignty Adjustment Act. Everything seemed fine. Then the cracks began to show. It started with the communications. A message sent from the Valyrian homeworld to a mining colony on the Outer Rim should have arrived in 2 seconds. It took 40 minutes. The relay stations were processing data at a fraction of their former speed, and the traffic was overwhelming the basic software that had replaced the human-designed systems. Messages queued up. Some were delayed by hours. Some were lost entirely. The Council's communication office filed a report. They called it a temporary adjustment period and said the system would stabilize. It did not stabilize. It got worse. Trade negotiations between the Dravasi and 3 smaller species collapsed because the diplomats could not communicate in real time. A ceasefire agreement on a disputed border fell apart because the confirmation message arrived 6 hours late. Emergency calls from a colony hit by an asteroid storm were not received until 2 days after the storm had passed. By then, 400 people were dead. The Dravasi sent engineers to fix the relay network. They were good engineers. They understood the hardware. But the hardware was not the problem. The problem was the software, the routing algorithms, the optimization protocols, the millions of tiny decisions that the system made every second to keep data flowing smoothly. Those had been designed by Becky Sloan and her teams over the course of 15 years. They were not something that could be reverse-engineered in a few months. The Dravasi engineers filed their own report. It said in careful technical language that the relay network required a complete software overhaul, and that the estimated time for completion was between 8 and 12 years. Tyeel buried the report and told the council the situation was under control. Then the pirates came. Without Nora Finch's intelligence network, the council had no early warning system. Pirate fleets that had been kept in check for years by the constant pressure of human monitoring and human patrol ships suddenly found themselves operating in the dark. No one was watching. No one was listening. No one was coming. 3 major cargo convoys were hit in a single month. The losses were enormous. 2 of the convoys had been carrying food and medical supplies to outer colonies. The colonies went hungry. Prices for basic goods on a dozen worlds shot up overnight. People who had never worried about where their next meal was coming from started to worry. The council dispatched military ships to patrol the affected routes. But without the logistics network that humanity had built, coordinating the patrols was a mess. Ships arrived at the wrong locations. Supply lines were tangled. Fuel shipments were delayed because the orders had been stuck in the broken relay system for 3 days. Greg Holden, now safely back in human space, heard about the convoy attacks on a newsfeed. Pete Garza was sitting next to him in a bar on the colony world of New Bristol. Pete looked at the screen and shook his head. "That is the same route we used to patrol," Pete said. Greg drank his coffee and said nothing. There was nothing to say. 1 year after the human withdrawal, the Zorvan made their move. Warlord Kreth had been waiting for this. He was not a patient creature by nature, but he was smart enough to recognize an opportunity when one fell into his lap. The humans were gone. The Council's military was disorganized. The intelligence network was blind. The galaxy was wide open. He started with the Pellini. The Pellini homeworld and its colonies were located in a stretch of space that the Zorvan had wanted for centuries. The Pellini had survived because the cost of attacking them had always been too high. Human ships had patrolled the border. Human intelligence had tracked Zorvan fleet movements. The threat of a combined human council response had kept the Zorvan in check. Now there were no human ships, there was no intelligence, and the council could not organize a response fast enough to matter. Kreth's fleet hit 3 Pellini border colonies in a single day. The attacks were fast and brutal. The Pellini Defense Force was small and outdated. They fought bravely, but bravery was not enough against warships 3 times the size of their own. Omix stood before the council and begged for help. His voice broke as he described the attacks. He named the colonies that had fallen. He showed images of the destruction. He asked the chamber to send ships, anything at all. The council voted to send a joint fleet. It took 2 weeks to organize, then 3 weeks, then a month. Ships from different species had never trained together, without human coordinators managing the logistics. Supply chains were confused. Communication between fleet commanders was unreliable because the relay network could not handle encrypted military transmissions at speed. By the time the joint fleet arrived, Kreth had taken 5 more Pellini colonies and was pushing toward the homeworld. Tail faced the council chamber for the first time without his smile. Delegates from a dozen species were shouting at him. They wanted to know why the communication network was failing. They wanted to know why the military response was so slow. They wanted to know why nothing worked anymore. Tail did what he had always done. He deflected. He blamed the Valurians for not maintaining the relays properly. He blamed the military commanders for poor planning. He blamed the Pellini for not investing in their own defense. He blamed everyone except himself and the resolution he had spent 3 years building. But the truth was becoming impossible to hide. The galaxy was falling apart, and everyone could see it. Zorath called a closed session. Only the senior representatives were allowed in. He stood at his throne, and for the first time in anyone's memory, the High Arbiter raised his voice. "We made a mistake," he said. His crystalline face showed cracks of stress that had not been there a year ago. The humans were not a junior partner. They were not a species that needed to be managed. They were the foundation. They built the systems we depend on. They protected the worlds we could not protect ourselves. They held this galaxy together, and we voted to push them away because we were afraid of how much we needed them. The chamber was silent. Even Tail had nothing to say. A delegation was assembled to contact humanity. They sent messages to the human border. Official messages, diplomatic messages. Some were formal and stiff. Some were close to begging. The messages were received. They were acknowledged. And a response came back from Leo Pratt, written in his perfect, polite handwriting. "We appreciate the Council's communication. Humanity is focusing on its internal development at this time. We wish the Council well in addressing its current challenges." That was all. No anger, no conditions, no list of demands, just a closed door, delivered with a courtesy that somehow made it worse. They offered to repeal the resolution. They offered trade deals. They offered formal apologies. Every response they received was the same. Polite, warm, final. Olmec stood at a viewport on Colossa Station, watching the distant glow of Zorvan engines burning across the stars toward his people's space. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, thin and tired and old in a way that had nothing to do with age. "They told us," he whispered. "They showed us every single day what they were, and we refused to see." No one heard him. The station was very quiet these days. 5 years. That is how long it took for the galaxy to understand what it had lost. The Galactic Council still met in the Chamber of Voices. The seats were still filled. Zorath still sat on his throne, but the chamber felt hollow now, like a house where someone important had died, and no one had moved their things. The Zorvan had carved out a territory that stretched across what had once been Pellini space, and reached into the borders of 2 other minor species. Warlord Kreth ruled it with an iron grip. He did not answer to the Council. He did not pretend to. The Council sent him strongly worded messages, and he ignored every one. The Dravasi hegemony was cracking from the inside. The trade routes they had controlled for centuries were no longer safe. Piracy had not decreased. It had become a permanent feature of galactic life, like weather. Dravasi colonies that depended on imported goods were running short, some had begun to starve. The Dravosi public, who had been told that Resolution 7742 was a triumph, began to learn the truth. They were not happy about it. Tail was gone. He had been quietly removed from his position after a series of leaked reports showed that he had known the consequences of the resolution before the vote, and had pushed it through anyway. His replacement was a younger Dravosi named Sarah, who had the look of someone who had been handed a burning building and told to put out the fire with her bare hands. Zorath had aged. His crystalline skin, once a deep, rich blue, was dull and streaked with gray cracks. He moved more slowly than ever. He spoke less. He spent long hours alone in the chamber after sessions ended, sitting in his throne and staring at the empty human chair. Behind the human border, things were very different. Humanity was thriving. 5 years of pouring their energy into their own worlds instead of propping up everyone else had produced results that even Danny Marsh had not expected. New colonies had been established on 12 worlds. The population was growing. Cities were being built with a speed and ambition that reminded people of the early days of human expansion, except this time they were building for themselves. Katie Voss commanded a fleet that was twice the size of what she had before. Ships that would have been assigned to patrol routes in Council space were now defending human borders and exploring new territory. Her officers were sharp, well-trained, and rested in a way they had never been when they were spread across half the galaxy. Becky Sloan had designed a new communication network. It was generations ahead of the old relay system. More secure, more efficient. It connected every human world in real time, with a clarity that made the old system look like 2 tin cans connected by a string. She had offered to share the design with no one. Nora Finch ran an intelligence operation that was, by any measure, the most advanced in known space. She knew where every Zorvan fleet was. She knew what the Dravasi were arguing about behind closed doors. She knew which minor species were on the edge of collapse, and which ones were holding together. She shared this information with exactly one non-human entity, and that was the Peleni government, through a private channel that the Council did not know about. Danny Marsh had retired. He lived on a colony world called Haven, a green and quiet place with wide fields and slow rivers. He grew vegetables in a garden behind his small house. He wrote his memoirs in the mornings and took long walks in the afternoons. He did not miss the Chamber of Voices. He missed the idea of what it could have been. Then the Peleni came. A small ship appeared at the edge of human space, broadcasting a civilian identification code and a request for permission to approach. It was old and battered, and it moved with the unsteady rhythm of a vessel that had been pushed beyond its limits. The Border Patrol contacted Danny. He was not an ambassador anymore. He held no official position. But when they told him who was on the ship, he did not hesitate. "Let them through," he said, "and send a transport to bring me to the border station." Omic looked terrible. He was thinner than Danny remembered, and his skin had a grayish color that spoke of too many missed meals and too many sleepless nights. He walked with a limp. Behind him were a handful of Peleni refugees, women and children mostly, with the hollow eyes of people who had seen things they would never be able to forget. For a moment, they just looked at each other. 2 old diplomats who had once sat in a room drinking tea that neither of them touched. Then Omic spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you remember what you told me, Danny? You said to look after my people. I have tried. I cannot do it alone anymore." Danny did not answer right away. He looked at Omic. He looked at the refugees behind him. He looked at the small children holding their mother's hands, staring up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Then he put his arm around Omic's thin shoulders and guided him inside the station. He sat him down at a table and brought him food. Real food. Warm bread and soup and fruit that Omic stared at as if he had forgotten such things existed. "Eat," Danny said. "Then we will talk." Omic ate, and when he was done, Danny picked up a communicator and said, "Let me make some calls." The story did not end with a grand fleet jumping into Council space. There was no dramatic rescue, no speeches, no triumphant return. Humanity did not forgive the Council. They did not pretend the betrayal had not happened. But they remembered who had stood beside them when it mattered. A human medical ship appeared at a Peleni refugee camp on the edge of Zorvan-occupied territory. It was unmarked and traveled without escort. It carried doctors, medicine, food, and water. Amy Bright was on board. She set up a clinic in the ruins of a bombed-out building and started treating patients before the ship's engines had finished cooling. A team of engineers arrived at a destroyed communication hub on a Peleni colony that the Zorvan had raided and abandoned. They rebuilt the hub in 2 weeks. When it came online, it connected to a private network that linked directly to human space. The Peleni government could now communicate with its scattered colonies again. He began running escort missions for Peleni convoys carrying refugees and supplies through dangerous space. Pete Garza stood beside him on the bridge, watching the stars ahead, and said, "It feels good to be doing this again." Greg nodded. "It feels good to be doing it for the right people." The Council heard about the human ships in Peleni space. They sent messages asking if this meant humanity was returning. Leo Pratt, who had come out of his own retirement to handle the communications, sent back a short reply. "Humanity is assisting its friends. This is not a Council matter." The message was clear. Humans had not come back for the galaxy. They had come back for the people who deserved it. The final scene took place on the observation deck of the border station, where Danny and Omic had reunited. It was late. The two of them sat in chairs by the wide viewport, looking out at the stars. Omic was still thin, but the color had come back to his skin. He had eaten 3 meals that day and slept for 8 hours the night before, which he said was more sleep than he had gotten in a month. "Do you think the Council will ever understand what they lost?" Omic asked. Danny thought about it. He watched a human cargo ship pass by the viewport, heading out toward Peleni space with a hold full of building materials. "Some of them will," he said, "the ones who pay attention, the ones who remember what it felt like when things worked and are honest enough to ask why they stopped. But most of them will write histories that blame everyone except themselves. That is the way of things." Omic nodded slowly. "And humanity? Will you ever come back to the galactic stage?" It was a small smile, the kind that comes not from happiness, but from a deep, tired understanding of how the world works. "We never left, Omic," he said. "We just stopped carrying everyone else while we walked." They sat together in the quiet, 2 old friends from different worlds, watching the stars turn slowly past the window. Far away, on Colossa Station, Zorath sat alone in the Chamber of Voices. The session had ended hours ago. The delegates had left. The translators had been turned off. The only sound was the faint hum of the station's air recyclers. On his desk was a report. It described human ships operating in Peleni space, medical ships, engineering teams, military escorts, small actions, quiet actions, the kind of actions that the Council had once taken for granted. Zorath set the report down. He looked across the empty chamber at the small metal chair near the back of the lower level. It had not been moved. No one had thought to remove it. It sat there, with its thin cushion, waiting for someone who was not coming back. The High Arbiter of the Galactic Council opened his mouth to speak. But for the first time in his long, long life, he could not find the words. The chamber was very quiet, and somewhere out among the stars, the humans were building again. Not for the galaxy, not for the Council, but for the people who had earned it. And that, in the end, made all the difference. Danny Marsh stood alone in the Chamber of Voices. It was the largest room he had ever seen in his life, even after all these years. The ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Tiny wisps of moisture pulled from the air recyclers of Colossa Station. The walls were lined with hundreds of seats, each one shaped differently to fit the body of a different alien species. Some were wide and flat, some were tall and narrow, some looked more like nests than chairs, and one, near the back of the lower level, was a plain metal seat with a thin cushion on it. That was the human seat. Danny looked at it for a long time. He had sat in that chair for almost 15 years. He had given speeches from it. He had argued from it. He had made promises from it that he had kept. Every single one. And now, he was going to stand in this chamber one last time. And no one around him understood that yet. He closed his eyes and let his mind go back to the beginning. 40 years ago, humanity had figured out how to travel faster than light. It was messy. The first ships shook so hard that the crews came out with nosebleeds and ringing ears. But they worked. And when those ships pushed out beyond the edge of the solar system, they found that the universe was not empty. It was crowded. The Galactic Council had existed for thousands of years. It was made up of dozens of species, some old and powerful, some small and quiet. The Valorians were the oldest. They had skin like living crystal, and they moved slowly and spoke even slower. The Dravosi were the richest. They controlled trade routes across half the galaxy, and they never let anyone forget it. The Zorvan were the most dangerous. They were a warrior species with massive ships and short tempers. And then there were the smaller ones, like the Peleni, a gentle, thin-boned people who had barely enough ships to defend their own homeworld. When humanity arrived, the Council did not know what to do with them. Humans were loud. Humans were emotional. Humans had only been in space for a few decades, while some Council species had been there for thousands of years. The Valorians looked at humans the way a person might look at a child who had wandered into an important meeting. The Dravosi looked at them the way a shopkeeper looks at someone with empty pockets. The Zorvan did not look at them at all. The Council gave humanity a provisional membership. It was the lowest level. It meant they could attend sessions, but could not vote on anything important. They were given that small metal chair in the back, and told to be grateful for it. Most species in that position would have complained. Some would have fought. Humanity did something that no one expected. They helped. It started small. A Valorian mining station on the edge of their territory had a reactor failure. The Council sent a committee to discuss the problem. Humans sent engineers. A team led by a young woman named Becky Sloan arrived at the station, rolled up their sleeves, and fixed the reactor in 9 days. The Valorians were confused. They had not asked for help. Becky told them they did not need to ask. Then a plague hit 3 Peleni colony worlds. The sickness spread fast, and the Peleni did not have enough medical ships to reach all the affected areas. The Council debated sending aid. The debate lasted 2 weeks. While they talked, a human naval officer named Katie Voss took a convoy of 6 ships, loaded with medicine and supplies, straight through Zorvan-contested space to reach the Peleni. She did not ask the Council for permission. She did not ask the Zorvan for safe passage. When a Zorvan patrol challenged her, she told them plainly that she was carrying medicine for dying people, and that they could either shoot her or get out of her way. They got out of her way. The Peleni never forgot that. Their liaison to the Council, a quiet diplomat named Omik, made a point of visiting the human embassy afterward. He thanked Katie personally. He thanked Danny. He told them that his people had been part of the Council for 600 years, and no one had ever come to help them that fast. Danny had smiled and told him that was just what humans did. Over the next 20 years, humanity became essential. Not powerful, not feared, essential. There is a difference, and it is an important one. Leo Pratt, Danny's closest friend and the smartest strategist he had ever known, built a web of trade agreements and mutual defense pacts that connected dozens of worlds. He did it quietly, without fanfare, one handshake at a time. He knew every customs regulation on every major trade route. He knew which species needed what and who could supply it. He made himself so useful that delegations started coming to him before they went to the council. Becky Sloan did something even bigger. She and her engineering teams designed and built the Subspace Communication Relay Network. It was a system of hundreds of stations spread across the galaxy that allowed instant communication between worlds. Before the relays, sending a message from one side of council space to the other took days. After the relays, it took seconds. The council used it for everything: governance, trade, military coordination, emergency response. It became the nervous system of galactic civilization, and humans had built every piece of it. Nora Finch ran intelligence. She was not a spy in the dramatic sense. She was an analyst, a listener, a person who paid attention when others did not. She set up a network of monitoring stations and information-sharing agreements that gave the council early warnings about everything from pirate activity to illegal weapon shipments. Her work saved lives on dozens of worlds, and most of those worlds did not even know her name. But not everyone was grateful. Nora had been warning Danny for years. She told him that the Dravasi were growing nervous. Humanity was becoming too important, too connected, too present. Ambassador Tail, the Dravasi representative, had started saying things in closed sessions. He called humans aggressively helpful. He said their generosity was a form of control. He suggested that no species should be allowed to make itself so necessary to so many others. Danny had listened to Nora's warnings, but he had not acted on them. He believed that actions spoke louder than whispers. He believed that if humanity kept doing good work, the politics would take care of themselves. That was his mistake, and he would carry it with him for the rest of his life. The message arrived on a Tuesday. It was a formal summons, written in the cold, precise language of council bureaucracy. Danny was to appear before a full session of the Chamber of Voices to discuss what they called the revised terms of human membership. Danny read it 3 times. Then he sat down at his desk and stared at the wall for a very long time. He knew what those words meant. He had spent enough years in this place to read between the lines. He picked up his communicator and called Leo. His friend answered on the second tone, and Danny could tell from the silence that Leo had received the same message. "They are going to try to leash us," Danny said quietly. Leo did not argue. He did not offer comfort. He just said, "Yes, they are." Danny ended the call and looked out the window of his office, at the stars beyond Colossa Station. Somewhere out there, human ships were running patrols for ungrateful worlds. Human engineers were fixing systems that no one thanked them for building. Human doctors were treating patients who would never learn their names.